How did you find that first module? Did it resonate with you? Have you experienced the drift in performance after an improvement deployment has finished? Well, the secret to understanding why people take certain actions or behave in certain ways on the outside is to understand what's happening to people on the inside. What I came to realize is that the logic of what it is that people should be doing was not enough to reliably and repeatedly get people to adopt the desirable actions and behaviors that would result in the desirable outcomes. During my career, I've also had a little hobby of desktop computer building. What I came to realize is that our brains behave in very similar ways to how a computer operates. And in realizing that, I began to understand how I could get the best out of myself, and therefore other people could also get the best out of themselves. I call this the computer brain. Now, what I'm not going to do today is talk about neuroscience in any great detail. But in order to understand how people give their best when they are part of a team, it's important to understand some of the key functionalities and characteristics of this incredibly complex organ in the human body. In a similar way that people are organizations, we are what our brains do. There are different areas of the human brain, and they each have different functionalities. Areas like the prefrontal cortex, which has the coordinator role in the brain, the basal ganglia, which controls our repetitive behavior, the cerebellum, which controls our movement, the amygdala, which is key in regulating our emotions, the hypothalamus, which is key in controlling our metabolic processes, the hippocampus, which has a huge role in the transferring of short or working memories into long-term memories, and the striatum and nucleus accumbens, which has a huge role in our motivation and reinforcement of our learnings. What I find most fascinating, however, is that the real power of the brain lies not in the individual components or areas, but rather how they create networks and systems between them. It's both the individual components and the system behavior which reminded me of how a computer works. For those that don't know, this diagram describes the inside of a computer or computer device like your smartphone. In the device, there's a processor component which both coordinates how the computer works and also performs the actual calculations required in any given moment, almost like it's conscious thoughts. There's the working memory that holds the information which is being used by the processor in that moment. And finally, there are long-term memory components which store all the saved information, programs, and apps that are run on your device. In addition to these three elements, there will also be input and output devices such as the keyboard, monitor, touchscreen, speakers, or webcam. Simplifying the human brain's functionality down to three elements is what helped me make sense of how to get the best out of my own output devices to consistently generate outcomes and experiences that I actually desired. Let me give you an explanation of how this relates to what we experience as people. The processor is the equivalent of our prefrontal cortex. It is the CEO of the human brain and controls and coordinates the high-level functions, the conscious thought bit. The working memory in the human brain is more like a system between different areas of the brain rather than a single component. It's both limited and fast, which is just like how working memory in a computer device works. Long-term memory storage in the human brain is a distributed process involving multiple regions, with an area of the brain called the neocortex playing a central role in housing these memories. The hippocampus facilitates the transfer of information to the neocortex, and other areas like the amygdala, basal ganglia, and cerebellum contribute to the storage of specific types of memories. Like a computer, we also have numerous input and output devices. Our senses take in information about what's happening on the outside of our bodies, and other parts of our bodies, like our limbs and mouth, are used to take actions which ultimately lead to outcomes. These outcomes are also obviously detectable by our senses, which then creates a feedback loop inside the whole system, which we obviously experience as learning. You can think of this learning as the computer brain being able to write its own programming code and apps, in a similar way to the artificial intelligence that many of us get excited hearing about. But unlike artificial intelligence, our programming is not written in code, but rather in values and belief systems, which are created from how we interpret the experiences we have throughout our life. Some of these experiences will be childhood experiences, some from school or university, and others from work and our adult personal lives. So if we want to be able to change the action of the output devices to get the outcomes we want, we ultimately need to help the computer brain write the appropriate programming code or value and belief systems. Before you start the next video, I'd like you to do a little exercise. Write down 3 beliefs that you hold that you feel very strongly about. They can be anything you want, and they don't need to be work related. I then want you to think about the earliest memory that you have that you associate with this belief. Then I want you to imagine yourself as a third party watching your younger self having that experience. Describe what you see: people, places, context, and what you were doing. Next, I want you to write down what you notice about this experience that you perhaps hadn't noticed before. Looking at your younger self as a separate person to the person you are now, what would you say to that person to help them understand what the key takeaway is from the experience they are having? Finally, I want you to be really honest with yourself. Does revisiting this experience change anything about the belief you started with? Do the exercise, and I'll see you in the next lesson.